So the next few episodes, I'm going to be painting my wall because I never filled out these fucking books labels. You know, these are just empty vessels, right? There's no meat in between the bread. So I'm going to paint this shit in and we'll just drink and talk along the way. I'm thinking like bigger alcohol concepts, or like how to approach it 30,000 feet up instead of on the specific brand by brand basis that I usually do. I will be drinking a product each time though, but I won't really be talking much about it. Before we get started today, I want to tell you about the wine that I'm drinking briefly. This is Paso Signorins, if you can see that. It's an Albarino, right? Albarino, typically Spanish or Portuguese grape. Most of it's grown in Spain, but a lot of it's grown in Portugal. Albarino, it's a white grape that's kind of in the Picpoul family. If you don't know what Picpoul is, that's like a mix between a Pinot Gris with minerality and a Sauvignon Blanc. The acidity levels range. So yeah, that's what Albarino kind of reminds me of, is that like that ballpark of those grapes. It's pretty freaking good. This is a 2017. You know, it's a pretty solid wine. It's very quaffable, right? It's off dry, you know, so neither too sweet, neither too dry. Enough acidity that you've got some structure to it. A little bit of like chalky minerality and like lemon and grapefruit zest. Definitely grapefruit. Pretty fucking good wine. Anyway, let's go ahead and get right into fucking painting this wall. Today I'm gonna do this gray one and this yellow one and just talk about shit that comes to my head. About alcohol, hopefully. I think that the gray one, the gray book, I'm going to paint... Fuck, should have thought about this beforehand. I'm going to paint with my amazing technical art prowess the word beer. I can do that. I am like Leonardo da Vinci with the Vitruvian Man, just for beer on a label. I think I'm going to go orange. Yeah, let's go orange. God, you guys must be so fucking bored by this point. Alright, let's paint the word beer in orange. So one thing that I want to just kind of randomly bring up, is how I think about what makes a good alcohol. Like what is something that makes an alcohol really stand out. You've probably heard me say it before, but I like movement, right? So this is the idea that when you first taste something, it hits you with an initial palate, like its initial impression, which usually by that time most novices make a face of some kind. Either it's a oh or it's a right? I don't like to do that. I like to wait, reserve judgment, and just see what happens, right? To see if there's movement. And that's not to say sometimes there's a, you know, just a one hit, you know, there's a single initial palate and it tastes like what it is. And sometimes that's perfectly fine, and there's no issue with that at all. These are things like Bud Light or even very simple, I don't know, Pinot Grigio out there. They're perfectly fine. You know, it's just like, this is what I am. And that's fine. Although I like to keep my mind open and wait to see if there's any movement. So it hits you with an initial palate, and then there's a shift, right? There's a movement either sensationally, like perhaps it starts off and it feels sweet, right? You're like, oh, this is a sweet blah. And then the acidity kicks in. And then you go from sweet, and then it's like, oh wow, there's some acid, right? That kind of puckering structural sensation that happens. And that's great. And then, but I still wait even after that. Because sometimes there's one or maybe even two more movements that can happen, right? So the acidity, after going from sweet to acidity, sometimes you'll get the minerality of it, right? So this is, I like to compare it to water flowing over stone, right? Like that's how I perceive minerality a lot of times. So this is an example of that, this particular wine, this Albarino from Pazo Signorens. I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation. Is it does have the three movements, right? Which is cool because I think it's under $30. I got it at wholesale, so I don't know exactly what the retail price would be, but it's probably under $30. So there's an example of that, right? Is when you have, to me, once you've got like 3+ movements, like that's a pretty freaking good alcohol, whatever it is, wine, beer, like who gives a shit really? Everyone has their own fancy, but that's something to think about is movement over time, right? And even better is when, as the temperature changes, you get even different movement, right? And you see this a lot with, for example, really well-crafted, big imperial stouts that have been maybe barrel aged with adjuncts, right? So like the breweries that can pull it off, which there aren't many, but there are definitely some, you get that first stage of movements, right? So, maybe there's 2 or 3 movements on your palate. And as the temperature changes over time, as it invariably gets warmer, right, those movements may shift. And so you've got a whole new subcategory of new movements, right? So all of a sudden, wow, there was fucking prune in there, or there was like some deep dark chocolate that I didn't really get at first, because all I got was bourbon in the beginning from the barrel aging. But now I'm getting some more chocolate notes. So I think it's great when alcohol producers can achieve these movements, especially through time. That's why sometimes it is worth that obscene price point of like a really good wine or a really good liquor, is when it takes you on a fucking ride, right? I think this looks pretty damn good. I hope it's legible. I can't really tell from right here. It does spell beer, B-E-I-R. Yeah, it looks pretty good. So now I'm going to pause it real quick because I want to make sure that I don't overrun the footage thingamabobber, as I've done a million times before. So I'll be right back. You won't know the fucking difference because I'm just going to cut it, right? I'm just going to edit it. It'll be like, boo! This one's a little bit scarier. I'm going to go for fermentation on this big yellow one. So I know I can spell it, so I've got that going for me. But we'll see how the execution goes. It's all in progress. This life, it's all in progress. All right, I'm going to go with black. So it's like a bumblebee, which, by the way, save the bees. I just recently started telling people that when I saw a bee the other day. That is, I saw A Bee's Life. That's the one with Jerry Seinfeld. It's not very funny, actually. The movie, it's okay. It's not terrible. Fermentation. So while I'm drawing this, let's talk about it. What is fermentation anyway? For me, fermentation is what allows, it's really a chemical process. It's a transformation. But it allows for us to have booze, right? It's the basis of booze, is these little fucking microbes eating some form of sugar and pooping out CO2 and ethanol. Right? Fermentation happens all over the place with all different kinds of microbes, different sugar bases. It's a very complex but also simple process. Well, simple for us, complex for scientists and biologists. But it's super key, right? So imagine we're drinking this wine right now, this Albarino. So basically the way that would all work is you've got these grapes, right? So these grapes are growing in this field, in this vineyard. They're Albarino, so they have a certain characteristic to them, right? Lots of different biological characteristics that behave differently through fermentation. So what you could do is take those grapes, mash them up real good. There's already sugars within the grape, right? So you don't need to mash it like you do with grains. You don't need to malt it and go through that process. The sugar's already there, kind of like with honey. Honey, the sugar's just kind of already there. And it's better to have some dilution for honey because it's kind of a nasty environment for microbes, honey is. Oh, it's completely off point though. So you take these grapes, subject them to this microbe, and the microbe is going to eat those sugars. Gosh, this is looking rough. And all of a sudden, you've basically got a wine, right? You've turned what was just grape and sugar and water and tannin and all these different physical properties of the wine, of the grape, and you've transformed it through fermentation into a wine. Firm in. So that's a very simple explanation, right? Because how fermentation is conducted is very, very important, right? The temperature that it happens, the amount of sugar versus the amount of microbes, the strain of the microbe itself, right? I mean, what yeast are you using? A lot of producers have proprietary yeast, right? Like they grow it and cultivate it themselves. Ferment. Oh, we're definitely gonna run out of room. I'm gonna have to make this smaller. Fuck. So it's a simple process on one hand, but it's also incredibly complex on the other. And that's a big part of why things taste different, is the fermentation procedures. I'm gonna run out of space. I think I'm gonna go lowercase on this next part. And that's not even to get into the next parts, right? So like after fermentation, there's a whole slew of things you can do. You can distill it, right? You can turn it into into a liquor, or basically put it through a purification process to get rid of some more of the water. Fermentation, which produces its own byproducts of flavor. Oh my God, I just gotta fit that tiny little in. Van Gogh! Alright, well, I'll see you next time. Fuck yeah.